Just a little bit about myself. I've actually been in supply chain, direct procurement operations for about 22 years. Worked for some of the bigger CPG companies, chemical companies from Mars to Colgate to Cadbury Schweppes. Have my CPSM certified professional in supply management through ISM as well, and I'm a certified trainer. And I also teach these continuing education classes as well. I also have a Lean Six Sigma Green Belt and 7-step strategic sourcing certification, and I adjunct teach at Monmouth University and Rutgers University in procurement and supply chain as well. Just a little bit about myself. So today we're going to talk about travel management, which is a pretty sensitive topic with a lot of people, employees, and a lot of companies, based on their tastes and preferences, and especially at the executive level, it could get very sensitive. And also, so one of the things that you want to do, and as you manage a category like travel, say for a international company, if it's global, regional, whatever it may be, is you want to put together a strategy, right? Which basically talks about what are you going to do and how you're going to get there, over a period of time. What's the plan? And then you could take this plan and start implementing and executing. So once you have this plan, you also want to take it and communicate it out to the business owners, the end users, and make sure that they're clear on what you're trying to do. So just kind of going through the different stages on the next slide, you need to know what your current situation is, right? So where are you today as far as the maturity of the category? Do you need to put together supplier information, basically profile your category so that you understand who the suppliers are, as far as what you have as far as information. And then do you need to evaluate what the requirements are? So if you're going to go out to do an RFP or you want to do a sourcing review, what are the requirements, as far as our policies in place, or what are you trying to accomplish? Then taking a look at the external analysis, you first want to kind of assess your own supply base. So if you're kind of seeing who your suppliers are in the first quadrant as is, now you want to assess them. So now you want to determine, okay, 80% of our spend is with these 20% of the suppliers, or these suppliers we're not using very often. So it might make sense to do away with some of these suppliers. So at that point, you're going through it and determining, what suppliers you want to focus on. Take a look at that external market and try to understand what's going on in the marketplace. Do some benchmarking, check the trends, hire consultancy to help you with that, and try to understand what's going on in the marketplace, and is your strategy in line with the same, similar, or larger companies on what they're doing. Then you're going to put your strategy together. Usually a 3-year plan, which is considered long-term. Used to be 5 years, but now it's 3 years because it becomes more accurate within 3 years and more manageable, more realistic. At that point, you're engaging suppliers to do possible demos, capabilities presentations, RFIs, requests for information, and you're working with your stakeholders. So you're telling your stakeholders, hey, this is the plan. Does this coincide with your business strategy? So this way the strategy is the same, and it could be we want to go to a center-led one supplier globally, and that's in line with what the business wants to do, or the business might say, hey, we've got a couple suppliers in a couple of regions that we use, different countries for travel, and we don't feel that the global provider can satisfy some of those far-reaching countries, so we want to leave some of those alone, but kind of do a hybrid approach and still have a supplier that maybe does the majority of it, but have some one-offs as well that are not with that supplier. And then put your plan together. What's your implementation plan? Are you doing a auction? Are you doing a RFP? Are you going to negotiate with the current supplier maybe and just single source negotiate and redo the contract? What do you have to do as far as systems and processes that you need to put in place? Testing, making sure they're secure, making sure people have access, make sure it's easy to use, easier than what they've had in the past. Right? So it has to be very user-friendly. Move on to the next. Talking about project description, take a look at what you're trying to do. Are you trying to save some costs? And if so, what are those targets and what are they based on? Where do you have the majority of your spend? You know, a lot of companies have airline travel, which is a big chunk, close to half even with a lot of companies I've been with of their spend is with air. And I could tell you anywhere from 40 to 60% of that is done at the executive level with business class, which drives a lot of that cost. Right? So take a look at those opportunities and say, where can we leverage from an economies of scale or volume? Can we do a global agreement with a Delta or a United to try to leverage the United alliance that they have with their different airlines that we use in different countries? Can we use a Delta who works with KLM and Air France and leverage those spends as well to come up with a global contract? Right? What can you do to try to save as much as you can on the volume? Is it hotel spend, negotiating a certain amount of nights in hotels based on frequencies of stays and convenience of hotels to business locations? So when you take a look at your savings initiatives, they're broken into a couple different buckets. You've got consumption, which is your demand. Basically, what's your policy, what's your budget, like I said, what's your target savings, and what are the things you can do from a quick win standpoint, right? It could be as simple as we're using this hotel frequently, but we've got no contract in place, and we don't have any negotiated rates. So that's an easy one, right? That could be something that's simple to do. That's a quick win. You have a travel policy. Maybe you need to enhance it, add some more stipulations. You know, instead of 7 days to book a flight, maybe make it 14, so it's a cheaper. You get a cheaper rate. You could ask people to do multi-leg flights instead of direct. Some companies do away with business class altogether for their travel policy. Despite your level, you still can't use it. So you have to make sure your travel policy is enhanced to aggressively go after savings targets, and also what's going on with the trend. Advanced booking tool, utilize your self-booking tool. You know, the self-booking tools are much cheaper than picking up the phone and calling an agent. I mean, you can have doing an online transaction through your app or through the computer could be anywhere from $4 to $8. Where if you pick up a phone and call an agent, it could be $28 to $37. Right? So you're going to save a good amount of time if you can self-serve and do it on your own. As you know, if it's something that's simple that you can book on your own, try to do that. Try to get cost savings that way. And then price. You know, do the same for less. What's the price paid for a service or good, you want to try to reduce it, right? So get a better rate than you're getting now. If you're paying $9 or $10, you know, $7 or $8 for a online transaction, if you're going to go to another supplier, maybe they'll charge you $4. You know, maybe they've got better hotel rates than you're paying with your incumbent, right? Make sure they're negotiated. Maybe they've got better airline contracts and policies than you have, right? So leverage that as much as you can and go after those quick wins again. So taking a look at basically a positioning matrix, I actually call this the Krychek model. What you want to do is you want to take your different subcategories under travel, and you're going to place them in these different quadrants to show where they're at as far as their positioning, which will determine how you're going to focus on. All right. So if you got airfare, for instance, it's less strategic, but like I said, it's a major cost driver. That could be anywhere from 40 to 50 or 60% of your spend. Right. So it's something you're going to leverage. You're going to leverage, like I said, those airline negotiations. It's not very strategic because you pretty much know what you have to do. It's pretty tactical in that way, but you're going to leverage your spend. Then hotels is also very similar. not strategic. But you've got rate caps, or you're going to add leverages. You might be able to align regionally with some suppliers as well. So you've got that, and then you've got transport within travel, right? Which could be rental cars. It could be Uber, anything like that. Might not be a large percentage of the spend, but you're going to try to consolidate with some of those car companies and versus cab. For instance, Uber obviously is much cheaper than using a cab or a black car service. So get a global or a regional contract together with Uber and work with them. If you want to go global, you have to work with Uber at this point, because Lyft, which is their competition, they only support the U.S. Right? So that's the only real provider that does that type of service at this time. So you want to go through them and kind of measure their cost savings. And they'll actually help you measure your savings versus what you would have paid for a cab, and they actually contract that for you. Travel management company, you want one of those big companies out there, whether it's the CWTs, World Travels, the agencias, that'll manage your program for you. They're going to track your savings, track your spend. They're going to make sure that there's a policy in place that's being adhered to. They're going to house your contracts in their system, make sure you're getting the best rates when you book. They're going to be able to help track your employees so you know where they are. They're going to communicate to your employees if there's weather issues or delays. If your employee's stranded somewhere, they can pick up the phone and call an agent 24/7 and make sure their itinerary gets adjusted. Right? So that's the beauty of it, right? It's a kind of a white glove service. And then as you have that travel management company supporting the masses, you have, VIP divisions of that support the executives, where it's more white glove, and they've got dedicated employees that know their names, that work with their admins very closely, where they've got, some preferential treatment and higher level of service. The critical point of this, of having a travel management company and trying to go at least more than one region, or as many as you can, is for reporting. You want to try to be able to get reporting on one platform in a consolidated fashion so that you can judge compliance. You can judge who's traveling, who's using the system, who's not. If you take a look at your P&L spend from a finance standpoint, and you see you're spending $10 million in travel, yet you've got $5 million going through the system, there's $5 million that's going outside the system where people are booking rogue bookings with, Expedia, whoever, different types of companies. So then you could track it that way. You could see who's being compliant and who's not. So that's one way. You could also understand where your savings are, where your spend is, and better adjust possibly your strategy going forward for the next couple of years. So basically it's making sure you've got that customer service, or even taking it further, customer relationship management, really, with your end user and your client. Travel management companies to build that relationship so that they're on a first name basis, like I said, with the VIPs, and even some of them with the other level employees, to the point where they provide that higher level of service back to the travel. Go on to the next slide. Talk about the sponsor, steering committee. You want to make sure you've got the team identified. Who's the executive sponsor that's going to be accountable for this? Meaning, is it an executive VP level that reports up to the CEO, who is sponsoring this, whose name is on it, and who presents the results and the updates during executive committee meetings or board meetings to that level? So who is your sponsor at an executive level? And then you've got your core team, right? So who are the folks below the sponsor from a project lead standpoint or management standpoint that are driving it? It could be somebody from procurement in collaboration with folks from the business or finance or whoever. But who's your center of excellence team, your executive team for that? And then you have your support team. Who are the people in the regions who are supporting it in the different countries? From, say, a procurement standpoint, it could be. And then you've got your key stakeholders, right? Who are the end users that book travel the most? Executive admins in your headquarters locations or bigger site locations would most likely be your key stakeholders, right? So they're the ones that are that are dealing with the travel bookings for the executives, like I said, which is most of your spend. So those are the folks you want to make sure are happy, because if they're not, and one of the executives gets the wrong flight, doesn't get the right pricing, doesn't get the right seat, doesn't get the right time on the flight, right airline, those people are going to make some noise to the executives, and the executives are going to escalate it back to your sponsor, and then it's all going to come in cascading down and throughout the organization. So it's very important to make those key stakeholders as happy as possible, with a high touch when it comes to customer service. You want to make sure you have your vision and your mission, right? So you're basically you're going to have your mission, what you're trying to accomplish, and how you're going to get there, right? So with the vision. So if you want to talk about to execute preventive detective control points and compliance to increase employee accountability and reduce company costs for global travel with focus over the next couple of months, right? So that's pretty specific, right? So now you're talking about, okay, this is what we're trying to do, right? This is basically our mission, right? And then you've got your vision, which is success of the project we measured by our achievement of our savings goals of X amount of dollars gained compliance with travel policy. So you have a goal that's a percentage of spend possibly that you've identified, or maybe it's just a percentage of the airline spend. That's a cost driver. So you've got the what on the mission statement, which is what you're trying to do, and then you've got the how on the vision, right, which is explaining what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. Then you want to take a look at your spend breakdown, right? Where are the buckets of spend, right? What region has the buckets of spend? North America and Europe usually are pretty heavy travel locations for multinational companies, because you've got the Fortune 500 base of companies, which has to be based in the U.S. from a headquarters standpoint. These companies have to have domestic headquarter locations. So you've got companies that have a lot of their spend in the U.S. And Europe obviously is a big mecca with the EU and all the countries there and all the folks that travel to Europe, because Europe is really the hub, right, when it comes to Asia. So that's obviously up and coming, and Europe exceeds North America in a lot of ways when it never used to when it comes to volume and business and productivity in a lot of different companies. And then you've got Greater Asia, which is usually the third largest, and then LATAM, which could usually be maybe the fourth. So either way, you want to identify where your travelers are, where your executive team is, where's the majority of your spend going to be coming from. So you want to make sure those folks are addressed the most. I'm not saying don't, be mindful of the folks from different countries where there's only a couple of travelers, but you have to make sure you take care of the masses, right? So it's usually North America and EME, but make sure your spend's identified so that you can start off that way and understand where you need to focus. Then you want to take a look at your suppliers, right? So who do you have as far as current suppliers, say for air? Is it United, Singapore? Who are your hotels? There's different hotels. I put some in the city, New Jersey. So basically, taking a look at your landscape and saying, okay, here are the current suppliers we use today from a preferred standpoint. Here are the ones that we use the most. Here are the airlines we use the most. And then who are the alternates, right? Who are some of the ones that we don't maybe use as much, but, they're second and third tier as far as utilization volume, right? Maybe we don't fly as much with American, so maybe you can't get a global contract with them, because these airlines require a certain amount of spend in order to get a global contract. So maybe it doesn't qualify, right? Maybe there's some hotels where you don't have enough nights booked, so you're not getting the best rates, right? So that's where sometimes partnering with these travel management companies, where they're able to leverage their own spend from other clients, can be beneficial. And then you've got some of the non-traditional airlines and hotels too, where these are off the mark. These are one-offs. They're They're not heavily traveled. You're not going to have a very solid or global or maybe even regional agreement with a jet air. Some of the travel management companies won't even support those discount airlines because of the fact that the volume is so low and it doesn't make any sense. And then you're going to have hotels where maybe some of these hotels are heavier priced ones, right, that are out of your rate cap for your policy within your company. But maybe you're going to use them for certain executive meetings or something like that, right? So that's how the breakdown of what your suppliers look like. Then you want to identify what your buying process is, right? So what is your buying process today? How are you booking travel? How is it differing in certain countries, certain regions? Are the reservations being booked by individual travelers, by admins, or by both? Now, most companies, if you're below a certain level, you're booking your own travel. Some companies, a lot of different levels have admin support, where a lot of companies don't if they're flatter. So those admins will be booking travel for middle to lower managers sometimes, depending on how the structure is. A lot of companies don't have a lot of admin support, maybe of certain that are certain size or flatter, and the admins are only for the executives, right? So it depends on your corporate structure, but you need to identify how it's working today as far as how people are booking tickets or who's booking them for them. Make sure you understand your stakeholders' needs. I can't stress this enough. Right? Making sure you understand that they want quick responses. Right? They don't want to be having to wait 24 to 48 hours to get a response if they're trying to book a flight for the CFO on a Friday night and all of a sudden he's got to get out on Monday. You know, someone not getting back to them, it's on a 24-hour service, is unacceptable. What's the business strategy? Right? Is it just to get the best pricing and service, centralization, right? Your procurement strategy needs to be in line with the business strategy. You know, this should be very similar where you're trying to be center-led or get compliance and cost savings and quality and service, right? Those elements should transcend across just about any function of an organization, right? Companies are looking to get more for less. They want better quality, better service for a lower price. Right, so how are we going to get there? I'm talking about industry and market analysis and trends, and I've done some research here. You want to try to think of things that are innovative as well. Right, so if you're having a hard time with your travelers booking travel because they basically want to go off the grid and they want to book through their own travel companies that they book through their families and are familiar with, and they don't trust the company they're with, or no one's responding, or they have issues, so they're booking flights on their own. And you don't have a mandate, per se, which a lot of the times companies don't. So at that point, you have to try to figure out ways to engage with them and get them on board. Maybe having promotions, having a forum where you can educate them on things and also do giveaways or events or things like that to incentivize them to attend. The event, like I said, could survey them, but you could also show them what to do from a training standpoint. Here's how to download the app on your phone. Here's what the app is. Here's what it does. Here's an example of me booking a flight. Look how easy it is. By the way, your name's entered into a sweepstakes or a drawing or something. Plus, you get to meet the end users face to face. Right? If you can get some of the end users in different countries or regions all in the same room, you can let them meet each other too, so they could share their stories with themselves and you. And then tie it back into the company culture, right? Does this fit into the organizational health of the company, the organizational structure of the company? Biggest business impact on your program. The policy shouldn't be 40 or 50 pages, right? And if it is, shrink it down to 3 to 5 that are the top 10 things that people need to focus on, right? It should be very easy, very fundamental. People shouldn't have issues with the policy as far as understanding it so they can implement it. Lean on your travel management company, right? Make sure they give you the latest trends. Hey, what's going on in the market today? Artificial intelligence is something that's out there now. How are travel management companies using artificial intelligence? How are they using robotics when it comes to reporting? How are they using big data, right, when it comes to forecasting? How are they working with these trends that are out there from a technology standpoint to make sure that things are going to be going better in the future? Are they in line with that? Can your travel program scale to fold in new companies? If you're in an acquisition phase and you're constantly adding headcount and different platforms and different companies, can that travel company handle that? Can they handle the volume? Do they have experience with acquisitions and onboarding and integration? Right? So how can they add value there? And then shift the conversation of visibility versus cost savings, meaning maybe not focus on the cost savings right away, but more about transparency into the costs, right? Understanding what the costs are, understanding what the drivers are, understanding how the finance system works, so then you can plan your cost savings initiatives accordingly. Best practices revealed. Like I said, you want to have that executive sponsor support right off the bat. Your sponsor should not only believe in the supplier you chose, but believe in the program and what you're trying to accomplish. What are some of the improvements that you can make from a travel experience standpoint as well? Right? Maybe it's free upgrades to Economy Plus, or there could be some certain things you can do to help out. Maybe you can add a certain status, platinum or gold, to a certain high travel individuals with the company. There could be certain things that travel management companies allow you to do. Show how the suggestions tie into current travel trends. Build your trust. So once you have some successes under your belt, and say somebody goes on the online tool and books a 5-leg trip, and it was seamless, and they saved the money on the transaction, and it was very easy for them to do, and they did it after hours, and everything worked out great. There's a success story. Instead of paying the call fee with an agent, they did it on their own. They did it off hours, didn't have to talk to anybody, and it was accurate, and the pricing was great. Right? Have some of those stories to tell to get out to the masses, so that people start building that trust with the supplier. Well, that happened, I remember a couple weeks ago, one of my colleagues booked a really cheap flight and did it this way and said it was really easy, so I'm going to try it myself. Right? So have that advocacy built at the stakeholder level. Most dramatic career growth. Right? Develop an understanding of your traveler. What are their tastes? What are their preferences? How do you improve the process? And then how do you ensure that the policy is keeping pace with the change in business travel? Have your travel management company look at the policy. Have them make edits, adjustments to it on where they think there could be some innovation that's included, new processes that you might not be aware of, right? Let them weigh in on that and make sure that your policy is where it's supposed to be and not antiquated. Also, taking a look at the industry analysis and trends, what are the leading practices? If you're going to have interregional inventory of flights and hotels and bookings, how are you housing that information? How are you housing the discounts with providers? Is someone tracking your points? Are you allowed to keep your own miles and points, or does a company get them back? What's the right thing to do there? What are other companies doing in that situation? Policy restrictions, right? What are some of the policy restrictions? Maybe you can only spend $20 a day on certain meals. Maybe between lunch and breakfast, you're only allowed to spend $10 for each meal. Maybe at dinner you're allowed to spend 30 or 40. Maybe there's a cap that needs to be in place to control the spending on T&E when it comes to dining. That could be an example. Global agent online booking tool, like I said, having that online booking tool is important, but also being able to pick up if you're not getting what you want or the system's not working and there's a glitch or you're not comfortable with it, and call someone at 2 in the morning and they're going to pick up the phone. Regular checks on fares, service level agreements, etc. Go out to market. Even if you're with a supplier, every 2 years, do some benchmarking yourself, right? or constantly do it yourself. Once in a while, get on Expedia and randomly check a flight, and see if it's the same as what we're paying, if not lower. What are the lowest logistical fees? How do you track employees if, there's an unfortunate incident, an insurrection, some sort of, whatever it may be, bad weather, any kind of attack? How do you know where your employees are going to be? How do you know they're safe? You have a tracking system that's in place with the travel management company where they're able to have them check in different locations, so you can find out where the last place is that they checked in. And is it automatic? Is it automated based on them just having the app on the phone? How does that work? And some companies actually are starting to do that now. You want to take a look at your 5 forces, your Porter's 5 forces, right? So taking a look at what's some of the bargaining power, right, of your buyers. If you don't have the leverage, right, you can't use that volume and discounts, right, what are you going to do? How are you going to gain, your spend might be very low, like I said, but the travel management company might have a bigger footprint with some of those suppliers and get you better pricing, right? I'm not going to go through all this, but rivalry among suppliers, there's noticeable competition among rental car agencies, airlines, and hotels among our preferred suppliers, which is good, because you might be using 2 or 3 suppliers that are preferred, and the prices are very close. The service is very close. So at the end of the day, if something happens and you have to get rid of your current supplier, if you go to the second or third supplier, you're going to know they're pretty close, right, as far as their quality, service, and pricing. So that's good to know. A barrier to entry for a travel management company, new company that comes in a replacement, could be centered around technology and brand recognition. Well, perfect example with technology is the online tool that you're going to use with the new supplier is much easier to use than the one you're using today, right? So there, from a technology standpoint, people don't like change when it comes to new systems and new portals they have to learn. But if I told you it was going to be easier than you did it today, that might open your eyes a little bit. And then taking a look at some pressure from substitutes. There's some travel management companies that manage level of volume and have viewed for our business historically. So basically, do you have the right travel management company? Can they do this volume or at least more? Have they worked in similar industries that require, certain levels of service for certain levels of people? This is important. Focusing on your opportunity map, identify where your opportunities are within the category. Do you want to consolidate regionally and globally? You have to have a project pipeline laid out. What's your preferred list of suppliers? Have a rate card. Know what you're paying for different rates in different countries for the online booking tool, right? I'm paying X amount of euros in Europe and X amount of dollars in the U.S., right? So you would think that when you do the denomination for currency, it should be pretty close, right, depending on how the economy is doing out there relative to the quality, the service that you're paying for. What are the payment terms? Are they in line with corporate policy, right? Are there any rebates? Once we hit $5 million in spend with you guys, we get 1% back, right? If you hit 10 million, you get 2%. Is there something in place for that for us to get checks back? Are there volume rebates? Like I said, are we gaining a lot of savings from these contracts? Or maybe you don't have some relationships with some of these suppliers that we work with, which are one-off, and we do. So we're going to keep it the way it is, unfortunately, right? So it depends. What about your market intelligence? Like we talked about before, benchmarking, research, spend threshold model, right? Work with your suppliers for a fixed service and see, make sure their pricing, like I said, which would be in the second tier, if you're there, should be competitive. PO or go or no-go, free text POs with defined description. So make sure you've got your procurement process centered around how you're going to pay the supplier, how you're going to pay the travel management company. It's important. So then we took a look at today's. Now, what do you want to do tomorrow? You want to have a centralized travel agency for compliance to help manage all components optimally, as much as we can, to have it center-led. We'd like to. We realize it's not perfect, but we'd like to as much as we can. From, like I said, a compliance consolidation economies of scale standpoint. And we will have better negotiated overall rates, leveraging our regional and global opportunities and adherence to the policy. Well, we believe that the rates we're paying today are antiquated. You know, the contract's 2 or 3 years old. It hasn't been renegotiated. We feel there's money out there based on the responses of the RFP and the proposals. We feel that we're going to get good pricing. Right? There's an opportunity to get better pricing than we have today. Now, this is kind of the details of your 3-year plan. Right? So there's different waves that you're going to focus on. So maybe for wave 1 this year, you're focusing on getting the policy straight, right? Making sure that you're renegotiating some contracts that are regional for certain subcategories like hotel and airline that you know you're not going to bid out, right? Maybe it's open to new travel management company pilot. Maybe you're going to bring somebody in after doing an RFP and pilot them with a region or a couple countries. And then next year, it's focusing more on the hotels. Again, basically having the right regional approach, policy enhancements again, and implementing the policies now that you had to enhance. And now you're moving on to wave 3, which is travel management company management. So now you've kind of moved into that past the implementation phase, and you're in the maturity phase, at the end, where the supplier's got a couple of years under their belt. There's no learning curve. At the end of the day, they're able to provide a superior service than we had before. Now, you're also going to be sourcing throughout this, and maybe in wave 3, if you're unhappy with your incumbent on the bottom, you might resource it and go out for another bid if you think you need to move. So it depends. The supplier knows it depends on what they do in the first 2 or 3 years. They understand that. Last slide was talking about what the implementation plan is going to be. So you want to have it laid out, and this is kind of what you want to use as part of your updates to your sponsor. Right? So identify who are going to be the end users. Like I said, do a pilot launch. Have certain key performance indicators you want to focus on and that your team internally and with the supplier agree are the right key performance indicators to maybe track on a dashboard or something like that. What's your criteria for success? How do we know if this pilot worked well? Right? Maybe you could book multi-leg bookings. Maybe that's something new that you couldn't do before. Maybe you didn't have a booking tool before, and now you do. Right? How the after-hour service is working. Is no one picking up the phone at 2 in the morning? It's going to voicemail and no one's calling you back. Make sure you're piloting it, something that's sensitive with a certain country or region. Pilot phase, pilot setup configuration. Configure the tool, make sure IT is involved, make sure security is involved, make sure there's no issues from a standpoint of what you're going to do when it comes to the configuration of the tool. Review and test. Make sure you're testing the online tool and that it's validated. Do some training around some of the tool's functionality, which moves into the next part, right? Focus on that training. Make sure the customers are ready. Have communication plans go out, and have a pilot launch not only in one country, but maybe do it in different countries as well. Have selected users that are frequent travelers with their admins doing the testing so that you can get a feel of these are the people that are going to be doing it the most anyway. Let's get their feedback without exposing it to the entire organization in those countries, but let's get their feedback because they book the most, and they'll be able to tell us the things that make sense or don't make sense from what they're seeing. And then after the pilot launch, do an evaluation. How well did it go? What were some of the, successes? What were some of the failures, right? And what we do to put them in place from a corrective action standpoint moving forward, right? Is it follow-up calls? Is it an issue action log? What are you doing with surveys or feedback you get, or how are you handling that? And then there's the full launch. Well, you went through your pilot. You pilot in different countries, frequent users. So now you launch, right? So now you go to the different regions, and say Europe might have 4 or 5 countries there that you're going to go with that have the most travelers. Make sure they're launched, right? Make sure North America is launched. And this is where communication is key. Make sure your communication tool, whether it's the intranet, mass emails, whatever it may be, is clear. So people are learning something out of it that they didn't know. Right now they're learning the status of the project. They're learning that their country is affected first. Hopefully you've already talked to the admins and the frequent travelers to make sure that they were aware that they were going to be involved. So you had that conversation up front. But at the end of the day, make sure that you're ready to fully implement. If the pilots didn't go well and there were some hiccups, don't launch those regions. Right? Start with the regions that went really well first, if that's the case. Because it might not go smoothly for everybody. But start with your strongest region as far as results and feedback from, the business. That's who you want to start with. If you can go big at that point when it comes to the first supplier you work with, easy to use that country for that supplier as advocacy. Well, it went really well in Europe, so I can't see how it can't go bad here in North America, right? So you want to be able to have, that data, that plan in place. And that was all I had.